Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing the review on the Orion 7000. It's been quite anticipated for the channel. I've had a lot of people ask about it on the unboxing and overview that I did previously. So today is the day where we uncover all about this £3,300 monster. So I've got a lot that I want to say. I've actually got loads of printouts and stuff like that to go through. So I'm going to do it in a different style to what I would typically do. So we're going to have this is just basically the front on. And I've also got a screen recording going of what I'm seeing on the monitor. So we're going to do some kind of live thermal testing and talk about some problems that I've encountered with the system, as well as cover the things that you're going to want to know as well. So it might be a little bit of a longer video, but if you're going to be spending the price of essentially a good second-hand car, then I'm sure you're going to be willing to sit through the longer kind of content to learn the nitty-gritty about it. So let's talk about the specs and things before we get into the performance. So this is the 12900K variant with the RTX 3090, and that 3090 is a triple fan design. They're basically the highest spec components at the time when they produced this. They've put into this system. There is a SSD that's a terabyte Gen 4, which is a Micron drive, and then there's also a Toshiba hard drive, which is 2 terabytes for your mass storage and things. There's 32 gigabytes of DDR5, and if memory serves me correctly, it is running at CAS latency 38, which is a little bit faster than if you were to have a higher mega transfer. The motherboard is a custom build for Acer as well, and by what I can see, I'm not sure if it's actually going to be replaceable or not should you need to swap it out. You do have an option to add an additional SSD as well should you want to upgrade your NVMe storage. Power wise, it's using an 850 Light-On power supply. We'll talk more about that later. And then for cooling, there is two 140mm fans in the front. There's a rear 120, and then the cooling for the 12900K is a closed 120mm liquid loop with a single 120mm fan. So for your ins and outs, on the top we've got 3 USB 3 ports. There's also USB Type-C. You've got audio in there if you want to use a headset. There's also like a hot swap caddy on the top as well that you can put either an SSD or a hard drive in if you want to take maybe films or whatever to a friend's house. That just pops out. USB-C connection on the back, and that just slots in. Doesn't come with any drive in though, so you'll have to buy one yourself. Then for rear I/O on the motherboard, there's 3 USB 3s, 2 USB 2s, a 2.5 gig Ethernet, and also USB-C, and some basic audio. So that's the specs of the PC and the ins and outs and things like that. Let's cover off the BIOS first of all. So this is what you're going to see if you go into the basic settings. You can go F1 for advanced and you get a few more options. It is quite locked down though. It is obviously a custom BIOS for Acer. So there's not really that much you can do. You can look at things like your different modes. It's something you can actually change in the GUI on Windows if you'd rather do it like that, or you can do it in the BIOS depending on what you prefer. You have kind of minimal settings if you want to play around with things, but this is built for the people that want a system that works straight out the gate rather than going to want to tinker and do manual overclocking and stuff like that. So there's not that much to see. And also another thing with the boot options, I did actually add an additional drive to see if it would run straight out the gate, which it did. It was a Gen 4 drive, and it went into Windows, no worries at all. So should you want to add some extra storage or anything like that in the future, then you can do that very easily. So I've loaded into Windows 11. This is the home version that comes on this by default. A couple of things I just want to cover before we go into gaming benchmarks and stuff like that. So we've got our CPU-Z open here, so we can see the 12900K. This does run a core voltage from anything from 0.66 I've seen to 1.45, which is very high. That's definitely if you're going for maximum Cinebench scores kind of voltage, not something I'd want to see sustained. Thankfully it didn't last too long, so voltage is a little bit sporadic, which is one part of the heat that comes from this thing, which I'll talk about later on. Our core speed is about 5 gigahertz. It will go up to about 5.3. That's using the turbo mode, and then you will get a lower, obviously sustained when you're doing intensive work. And then below I've just opened CPU-Z as well. We can just put this to maximum temperature just for later use. So onto the PerdatorSense. I said about the 3 different overclocking modes you've got. You can just press one and then it will load into that overclocking setting. Obviously our core voltage and things will change. For all the games and stuff that I've tested, I have used the turbo mode. Because if you're going to buy a PC like this, you're going to want to use the most out of it, right? So let's go through the other things on the PerdatorSense, which is their kind of like baked-in app. So we've got the CPU temperature, GPU temperature, and then the system. You can do the overclocking mode on here as well if you want, and change the lighting profiles. I haven't played around with that personally. Lighting, you can go for specific areas in the case. So you could do motherboard, you could do the logo that's on the pump. You could do the fan separately, but global generally I think what most people are going to use. So let's just change something, a wave. Breathing rainbow is quite good. You have music effects as well, so if you've got something playing like on YouTube, you can have that on there as well. We'll just do that one for now. So then we've got the fan control, and this is where things get a little bit spicy. So as auto, this can go from anything from, I've seen about 800 RPM up to over 5,000 RPM. So we've got split into zones. So the one is for the front fans. This is just controlling both of them rather than individually. We've got 2 for the back, 3 for the top, 1200K, 120mm cooler, and then 4 is for the graphics card. So let's just give you a scenario. Let's say I want to do some gaming. Let's just change this preset over to gaming, and let's do that. This is where the problems begin. So as you can see, that was very loud. We'll talk more about thermals and things after we talked about gaming benchmarks, but I just wanted to show you this options here. You can obviously do a custom thing as well, so if you want to change things here, you can do. Don't know why it did that. I didn't say to ramp that CPU fan, but it did, so never mind. Let's go back to auto. Then monitoring, you can see with temperatures and things. So we've got a system temperature, our CPU temperature, and then we've got RAM frequencies and things like that as well. I did also notice that the memory is running at cache latency 36, so obviously a lot faster than what I said at 38. So considering it is a lower mega transfers, you do have a lower cache latency, so it kind of balances. Let's go into the benchmarks and things. So I ran my typical benchmark suite. So we did Far Cry 6, Dirt 5, Apex Legends, Valorant. I also did Cinebench as well, which we'll talk about separately. Far Cry 6 was the lowest performer that we saw, if you can even say it's the lowest performer considering we've got 120 frames, but 1440p is going to run perfectly. You could drop the settings a little bit more if you want to go for 144 Hz screen, or even go 4K, make a bit more of a jump, and then just drop the quality settings down a little bit more. So yeah, game performance, you know, top notch. I also did Cinebench runs as well, and we got 25,500. My 1200K will do 26,500. That's at stock. This was using that overclock settings, and we got 25,000. So there are limitations there down to cooling, which I'll expand on more in a minute. So we're going to go back to the PerdatorSense app, and then we're going to talk more about this fan control I mentioned. So if I put this onto gaming now, just look at the RPM. So as you can tell, very, very loud. And that's all down to one factor, the fact that they're using a 120mm cooler on a 1200K. Now for a bit of context, the 1200K that I cooled that with a triple 140mm cooler, and I reached a maximum of 83 degrees. Barely even spun the fans up because you've got a bigger surface area of radiator, so the fans can stay quiet. So when I looked at the Orion 3000, however long ago it was, I said that for a 700K, you know, 120mm fan AIO is all right, but we could do a little bit more. So they've kept the same size cooler for this last 3 generations of this system, even though they've been getting hotter and hotter every time. So who has looked at this and thought that's fine? There's a funny thing as well. There's even what looks like space for 120mm radiator in the top. So I'm dumbfounded who looked at this and said this is perfectly adequate. Now I've been speaking to somebody that has bought one of these in Australia for the whopping price of, with a extended warranty, about $8,300. The company that he's been dealing with, he's gone to get a refund because of the sheer volume, that the second he does anything intensive, it just does that. So I tested this with Cinebench, as I would do with any PC on the channel. My processor will hit 83 degrees on a triple 140. This poor thing with its 120mm cooler, reached a maximum on the package of 100 degrees, so literally at boiling point. And as you can also see, thermal throttle is a yes. And in another test I did, it also exceeded the power limit as well. So for thermal throttle, if you're not familiar with the term, basically it means the CPU will clock itself down so it protects itself when it's too hot. So that means if you're going to be using this system, those fans are going to ramp up. You're not going to get the performance that you expect from the 1200K because it's got inadequate cooling. So you're either going to have one of two scenarios: your processor's not going to go fast enough, or on the off chance that it doesn't throttle, you're just going to get a system that sounds like this all the time. Now that is me swapping it into gaming mode, but this is Acer software as well, so that gaming profile they put on there is from the factory. So whoever looked at it just must have thought of that classic meme, this is fine, and you know, thought just send it. So let's go for a custom setting. This is again with the on idle, it will ramp up like that. I just opened hardware info just to see if it was a temperature spike that caused that, but as you can see, these fans are just at 60%. You can't go any lower than that, and it's fairly loud even on 60%. If you fancy, let's go for 100% on all the fans. This is how loud this system can be. Should you turn it all the way up. Now, if you were to max out the fans on the 1200K system I did, it wouldn't be half of that volume. So I'm just going to demonstrate this. I'm going to run Cinebench in real time and keep these things open so you can see. So look, immediately 75 degrees. Let's just keep an eye on the package. So it's 83 at the moment. Here comes the ramping fans. Still going. Still going. You are clear for takeoff. I'm going to stop that because I've got more I need to talk about. So you might think, well, that's a artificial testing. It's not going to be similar to real world experiences. Now, the person that I said that I talked to previously about this system that bought one is running Blender, which is fairly intensive, but it's not an artificial benchmark, so it's something you're going to be using on a daily basis. And his PC does the exact same thing, ramps up like that. And the primary culprit again is the single 120mm cooler that's on the top. I was very tempted to take this all apart and swap it out with a Noctua to see how much difference that made. I'd also swap out for a 240mm AIO as well if I had the time, and just didn't have to go back or whatever, or be passed around for a loan. But that's something I can't really do at this moment in time. Now, if you go back to the previous video, which is the unboxing overview of this, you'll see that there's a thread in the comments of people that have bought this system that are just talking about it and just sharing the same experiences of it either being too loud because the fans just ramp, thermal throttling, so they're not getting the performance that they should have. It's just a real shame. I also noticed that it did a kind of really weird whiny noise after I came off the Cinebench test. Again, I think that's something to do with the 120mm cooler. Now, the person I mentioned at the start of the video as well that bought the system has also told me about bench tests that they did. They've had underperforming benchmark results that are unsuitable for their conditions, so CUDA 3D work, and they can't concentrate with fan noise. Their Cinebench score was 18,000, which is obviously way below the 2,500 that I got, and he actually asked the company that he purchased it from to send it to Acer to be looked at because it wasn't performing as it should. I have a real feeling that that's going to come back to him and they're going to say it's completely fine because Acer have classed this as a working system. It's a real shame seeing so many use case scenarios with the same results. Another thing that was brought to my attention as well was that Acer announced this PC with the 12900K before it was even released. So Intel didn't even release the spec of the processor, yet they'd already decided they were going to stick 120mm AIO in it still. So they really need to wait for the engineers to get their hands on the processor to see what kind of TDPs are going to be and to see how hot they're going to get, and then put in appropriate cooling because this simply is not adequate. So let's take that roller coaster back up after a real plunge down in negatives. I spec'd up a system on 3XS from Scan just to see what kind of price we would get an alternative computer at, and this is fairly similar with specs. It is a 240 cooler in this one though. You couldn't actually get a 120, which I think is a very good thing, and also used a Corsair RM850. The recommended guidelines for a 3080 is a 850 watt unit, and this is using a 3090 with a 12900K on an 850. Not overly known brand as well, so of course that 850 is the minimum I would recommend going for if you're going to build one yourself. I did miss out an SSD and hard drive on this build, but I did add it on in the end. Worked out £3,300, so exactly the same price as this system, and it's all pre-built. You do get a 3-year warranty with that as well, parts and labour included, and they will come and collect your PC should it be something they can't diagnose over the phone or with web support. I did price up a system if you were to build it yourself as well. That worked out at £500 less than the Orion, but understandably there are a lot of people that don't want to build systems themselves. They want to just buy something and get on with it rather than have to tinker around and do all the building themselves. My 12900K build that I did on the channel, that worked out £3,000. That was a liquid cooled 3080, but you can take a look at that video if you want and just see the quality of components that were in that. That will give you a much better idea looking at that in contrast to this. There are a couple of extra things that I do want to say before a bit of a conclusion. Now inside the components you'll see the RAM sticks, they're just plain green, there's no heat spreaders on them. Personally I do not like how they look at all. The same for the M.2, there's no heat sink or anything on that, so it's just plain green, just a bare bones Micron drive. There is some tape as well which doesn't look very nice aesthetically. There's just a few little things that just really bring the overall score of the system down. So a couple of thoughts from a bias perspective as well, just before we actually end up the video, a little bit of food for thought. They said that they thought it was going to be top of the crop quality, and the expensive looking case and exterior make the PC look and present itself like it's top quality, whereas in reality it's mediocre stuff with an overpriced price tag. He said it's much like the femme fatale of the PC community. So all in all, if you're buying a system purely for gaming and you're not going to be doing any kind of creative work at all, you could get away with this system if you can handle a little bit of noise from the fans. It's not going to be quite as crazy as that custom or gaming setting on the software when you're just playing games, but every now and again you will get a ramp up, so it's something you do need to expect if you do get this. Personally, I would say your best bet is to buy a system from a system integrator that can do you a custom job with higher quality components than buying something like this. The presentation just overall will be better as well. Yeah, you won't get the custom glass and Acer themed case that you will with this, but I think going for something that performs over aesthetics is definitely the way to go. The rep that I deal with is going to have a lot of information to pass on, so I apologise to you, but this is an issue that's been happening for 3 generations now and it needs to be addressed. So please Acer, please put a bigger radiator in your system. It will make night and day difference, even if it's a 240 from a 120, because you'll have double the surface area, means the fans will run at half the speed and they'll only ramp to half the total RPM of what this thing does. So yes, it's a bit of a different one. I've not had an overly negative video for a long time. but we need transparency, and you guys need to know about the flaws in these things so you don't spend the price of a second-hand car on them to then be disappointed and struggle like this person has to get a refund. So thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, ding the bell so you don't miss a future video, and thank you to Acer for sending this for me to look at. Please take this as constructive criticism, and hopefully we'll see an improved version next. Thank you all for watching, guys. I'll see you all in the next one.